award-winning solicitors Johnson & Boone, offering a wide range of legal services from alcohol licensing, wills, commercial, employment, family, divorce, and landlord and tenant matters. For more information, visit johnsonandboone.co.uk or ring them on 0151 637 2034. You're listening to Johnson & Boone Solicitors podcast exclusively on the Pod Station.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Johnson & Boone podcast. My name's Mark. Joining me this episode is the infamous. Which one do you want to go with?
I'll go with either of them. They're quite good, both of them, aren't they?
Yeah, it depends on the applicability, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, famous is a stretch, but we'll go with famous, I think.
the Boone from Johnson & Boone. It's Rob Boone. How are we doing, Rob?
Yeah, I'm really good, especially now you've called me famous.
Well, we're coming off the back of just recording with Gina and Chris, so it's nice to hear the familiar dulcet tones.
The familiarity of it.
Yeah. It's like slipping into a comfortable pair of slippers.
Well, we have been doing these for a while now.
We have, haven't we? Well, funnily enough, while we were recording, Chris and I were talking about this and how we started doing it during COVID, which we touched on in the 10th anniversary, which also happens to have been the 50th episode, so go check that out in the feed. I came to the conclusion it was because you were just looking to get away from the family for 5 minutes, because it was during the period where we were all locked up in the house with our loved ones.
And it was a reason to escape into,
as
into
much
a distant part of the
love
house.
was tested on all fronts from all families during that time. Just to quickly recap on, or if indeed this is the first time you've ever listened to one of these episodes, they are very much geared around being a resource tool for you, the listener. So we take a topic or a service that Johnson & Boone offer. We pick out something that's topical, something that is a common problem that people face. I'm the expert who sits in that seat, and Rob is our expert for today, to try and flesh out the bones of those situations, those scenarios, to give you information so you're informed. You can identify problems that might not have existed and you weren't aware of. It might be things that you can proactively do to avoid problems even existing. It might save you money, it might save you legal headaches, but fundamentally it's there to be a resource. So go to the johnsonandboone.co.uk website to check out the back catalogue of episodes. You can also obviously find them on whichever podcast platform you use to listen to these things. They'll all be there for you to listen to. Now, Rob, what we going to be touching on today with you, my friend?
So today we're talking again about commercial leases, and this time we're talking about it from the tenant's perspective, and we're covering a really common question that we get asked pretty much every single time we take on a new instruction. And that's when you start talking to the tenant about investigating the building and obtaining searches, so conveyancing style searches, and they'll always ask the same thing, and that is, do I really need them?
I guess it's quite a weird one because you use the same phrase tenant for like a house, so domestic. If you're a tenant and you lease a house, rent a house, I should say. And you obviously use the phrase tenant for commercial. From what I observe from the uneducated perspective, it feels like sometimes those worlds become a bit merged. People assume it's the same thing even though they are very different. So you probably wouldn't get a search if you were going to rent a house.
No, I think that's fair. I think as well, because as you say, the same term is used, then if you're a person who rents a property for yourself to live in, you'll associate that with having really minimal risk for you, really minimal obligations. And in that world, there's much more for the landlord to do than there is the tenant. But when you switch that to a commercial context, it's very much the opposite, whereby the tenant is responsible for everything. And the landlord rarely, might do things and then claim them back as a service charge, but they're running it as a business, and it's very much the tenant focus in terms of the obligations.
So on the back of that, I'm assuming the answer to the question, does a tenant really need a search, being a hard yes?
Yeah, I mean, we could just finish there today and say yes, but we won't do. As I say, it's a fair question, because by the time the tenant reaches the point of being faced with the big long list of searches that we might recommend, they've already negotiated heads of terms, they've already seen the property, they might have considered fit-out works, they might know that there's a draft lease that's ready to come over, and they don't really, if they can avoid it, want to then go down another avenue of whether they're going to investigate all the background in terms of the property. But when, as you say, if you compare it to when it's a residential property, searches are like a discovery toolkit, if you like, for a commercial tenant, because there's things in the background that might be lurking that aren't discoverable by physical inspection, and they won't be discoverable by looking at the lease documents themselves. So it's a risk finder, really, to see what's going on.
I suppose it might be, does asbestos fall into one of those things? I suppose that's a good example of a workplace.
That's separate, really. So in addition, again, as you can see how it builds for a tenant, in addition to, you've got the lease documents, which are contractual, you've got the actual commercial terms that they'll have agreed with the landlord. Then you'll have us saying you should get searches. Well, in addition, you should be asking the landlord whether they've got available asbestos reports, fire reports. They need to know the EPC position. There's a whole host of things going on, and that all points to why you need representation, because we'll give you a checklist, we'll get most of it for you as part of the process. But in terms of the searches, because it's something you have to physically pay for, you need to make a decision as to whether you want them or not, because you use a service online where you order them via a provider and then you wait for them to come in. And if we get them, then we'll report on them to you to say if there's any problems. But of course, if you tell us not to get them, we never know the answers, really.
Yeah, I guess you probably come across this very commonly, where they're quite keen to just get this deal over the line, whether it's because of excitement, enthusiasm, or because they've actually got a pressing time issue.
Yeah.
And wrongly, but we would say that because we're biased, the tendency might be to become frustrated with the lawyer, who seems to be putting blockers in place by suggesting these things, which are only ever going to extend how long it takes to do it. But your answer, and quite rightly so, will always be, yeah, but it's, can you afford not to do it if the worst case happens? And it's not you trying to put obstacles, it's, I guess, you just trying to advise them of potential issues, so that, again, they're making that informed decision. And if they want to play the roulette, they're perfectly entitled to do so, but it's having been told.
Absolutely. I mean, there's times when it's more risky than others, and we can, I can run through some of those things, but you are often seen as, are you just putting blockers in the way? Are you trying to charge for something that doesn't need to be done, etc., etc.? But as long as the client's able to make an informed decision as to what they should or could do and what the risks are of not doing it, then they can balance that up in like a risk-reward style way and make that decision.
Would you always be recommending searches on commercial leases? Is there a particular type of lease that sort of recommends it, that kicks in? Is it a case that some might need some searches, some might not need others? Like, how frequent is it that you're saying you could do with doing a search on this?
So in an ideal world, you would do it on every lease, really, but it becomes more risky in leases where they are of a longer period of time, because the longer period you're going to be in occupation, the more window of opportunity there is for things to go wrong. It might be that the property's in an area that's known for problems, so the areas that have previously had all sorts of mining over the years, then you get problems with subsidence, or you get just greater risks in those areas. So knowing that, it might be the property's in an area known for flooding. So there's a standard package of searches that's done everywhere, and then the idea is when you put the address into the system, it will tell you if it's in a particularly risky area for different things, and you can order the additional ones. The ones where it makes less sense is if it's an extremely short lease. So, if someone's only going to be in there for a very short period of time.
What's that? What sort of window is the short period of time, would you say? I know how long is a piece of string, but
what people tend to do is if it's less than 3 years, then people tend to not be minded to do them. 3 years is still a fair window, in my view, for risk. So if it's less than 12 months, I could see them making that decision, but up to 3 years myself, for the modest cost involved compared to what could go wrong, I'd still do it. But you do get people who, will be entering into a 15, 20-year lease and just will decide not to do it. And that is particularly risky then, because it's such a long window of opportunity, as I say. If you're not entering into a lease, but it's just a license for a short period of time, then you might not do it. If you're just taking an office in a shared building perhaps, and as I say, you just get a desk or a room or something like that, there might be other reasons why you don't. But generally speaking, there's very, very few tenants that we wouldn't recommend. At least look at the main ones.
Okay, and what are those main ones then? I guess that's led me on nicely to, you're a pro at this, it's led me nicely onto that next question.
So there's a list, there's a standard package that we put together that we think are the main ones that everyone should get. And they include things like the local authority search that will check things, that information that would be revealed by the local authority, so planning points and stuff like that. Then you've got drainage and water, which is exactly what it says. It's making sure things like it's connected to the mains and that sort of stuff. We always do a chancel check, so it's quite a historic one, but that's just basically checking whether there's any potential liability to contribute towards the repairs of a local parish church. So it's a really historic one, but it's one that catches people out. If you think where we're sitting now, this is a commercial block of properties on a high streety type sort of area, but there's a church, 400 yards away. So it would be entirely possible, if you didn't check, that you might have an obligation to contribute towards that, because back in the day, that's just how it was set
Well,
up.
they ran the roost, didn't they? And actually, the churches, aren't they, the biggest landowners in the country? Yeah. So it is very feasible. It's not. Very feasible. It might be an old rule, but it might.
And with that one, it's such a. I think the check is about £60 or something like that, and it's so unlikely now to be enforced that you can put in place an insurance for buttons as well. But you can guarantee that on the one you don't check, that will be the one that it's wrong on. And, imagine a roof going or something that you've got to contribute towards. So there's that. We always get an index map search. So if you think about how maps sort of click together on Land Registry, what that's doing is it's identifying all the title numbers that sit around your title number. And we're looking for any gaps. So we're looking for any bits that either you think you might own, but own as in within the lease, but are sitting under another title that needs to be reflected, or we're looking for things where it just looks unusual, so there's additional parcels that might be blocking you off from somewhere or something like that. And then we will always do an energy and transportation search and a commercial site guard, which is basically looking at environmental risks, contamination, stuff like that. Now, in some places, that will be a really straightforward thing that will come back as none. If there's a risk, then it might recommend a more enhanced search. But if you stick with the basic ones first, it saves you paying out on the expensive reports and not needing them.
So are there situations then where searches are more important? I mean, we've sort of talked about the length. Are there other factors that kind of are red flags for you guys when someone comes to you saying, I've got this lease opportunity or I want to do it, and you go, okay, right, you probably need to put this at the top of the list?
Yeah, there's certain issues. So I wouldn't necessarily say in terms of trading type instances that it would mean they wouldn't need them, but if you've got someone that needs a very specific use for a building, or they're going to do a change of use perhaps, or it's going to be pending planning, for example, you might want to know the history of the planning applications as well. I mean, you're unlikely to sign the lease until you have got all that in place anyway. You might do an agreement for lease, or you might do something else, but getting a local authority search, for example, in those types of things, at least you'll know what's gone on before and what the current use is. But there's lots of instances, again, a lot of them are sort of geographical in nature as much as anything else. So if you know that the property is in an area that's susceptible to flooding, then not only do you need to know the extent of that, but you might want to inquire as to what insurance costs might be as well, because I suspect in some places it becomes almost uninsurable.
Is there a legal liability to a certain degree, like a almost like a fiduciary duty. So if you're employing staff and you're leasing a building and you don't know what potential risks there are, but there are some, for whatever reason, it might be an exposure to something. Radon was the one I came across when we bought our house, that we were in a radon area. So we ended up buying one of them kits online where you have to stick it in your kitchen for 3 months to find out whether you might die of it at some point in the near future. But like putting that into a work environment, you've got, as an employer, you have a responsibility to keep safe your employees. And if there are things that you've sort of skipped past, which might expose them to health safety risks, for example.
There's all sorts of obligations, isn't there? I mean, the common one, which wouldn't necessarily fall within searches, is the asbestos one that you touched on earlier on. So you're supposed to investigate whether there is any asbestos, and then you're supposed to have a management plan in terms of what needs to be done with it. Does anything need to be done with it? When's it going to be reviewed? Because the answer isn't necessarily remove it. It's how's it going to be controlled or kept or whatever it might be. So there's that. And then, of course, everyone has to comply with all the fire safety stuff and all that. So there's stuff inside and outside of the lease itself that has to be maintained. But in terms of the searches, their primary job isn't for that. The primary job really is for the tenant to understand occupational risks for the business in terms of what might crop up and at what expense. So to give it an example, let's say the building has got a contamination issue, a historic contamination issue. There's instances when the current occupier might be the one that is asked to sort that out, or depending upon the nature of what that might be, it could be a monstrous expense. And if it wasn't, it might be a massive headache while you engage to find out who did contaminate or put it back to where it was. So it's like anything else. It's like an insurance policy, isn't it? You hope you never need it, and you hope it doesn't reveal anything because you might not proceed, but it's peace of mind that you're paying for.
Yeah, totally.
And people are more than willing to do that when they are purchasing bricks and mortar, because they see the capital investment.
Well, you say that. I once sold the house. The person who bought it sent the mortgage company around, who literally kicked the wall to make sure that it was a building, and then went on the merry way.
Marvellous.
And I don't think I'd ever sleep at night if I was spending that amount of money on something and didn't know the ins and outs of a duck's backside. You
get it, don't you? When people, there's different types of survey you can get, and you get, do you want the one where we don't stop the car, or do you want the one where we actually go in?
This was probably the discounted version of the we don't need to stop the car.
Yeah, the drive past.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't far off.
It looks all right from a galloping horse.
Yeah. I'd have offered him a coffee, but the kettle hadn't finished boiling by the time he'd left. So
yeah. I think there's a difference, isn't there? I mean, we digress a little bit, but there's a difference depending upon who's instructing that surveyor and what the purpose of it's for. Is it the lender wants to know, are there any latent defects and what's the value? Because that's what they're lending against. Whereas the person who's buying the property should be quite interested in its structural integrity, whether there's any problems, and if so, how much is it going to cost me to fix those problems? And even then, there's different grades of report. You see common problems, and I've discussed them with people over the years, where they think that a surveyor hasn't quite done enough. But when you've got to look at what you're asking them to do, what are the terms of that instruction? Because a lot of them are limited. They don't go into certain areas of the house, or they're certainly not going to tear anything down and look underneath it. So again, it's all about understanding what you're asking for and then understanding what you're getting. And I suppose this is the same thing as, okay, it's a couple of £100 of expense, but you're buying the certainty of knowing the answer. And if you can live without knowing the answer, then that's a matter for you. But if you'd prefer to be sure, that's the whole point of it.
It just feels like commercially, it's the scale is just like we were talking about, sort of a domestic situation there. But I do feel like commercial, the stakes are a lot higher because it's your livelihood. The monies that are passing are probably greater. It just feels like it's an insurance I would want. I'm an overly pessimistic human being. I'm a pint half empty.
Yeah, well, I think...
before I send my mate to the bar to fill it up.
we use the term regularly, don't we? But we professionally worry, because if we don't worry, then things will be missed. And we're not there to be negative. We're there to identify risk and then try to work out how we can negate any possible risks as well. Both, commercially, that in a way that makes sense, but sometimes just to someone's satisfaction level. So if as I say, I think the basic pack at the moment costs just shy of £400, something like that. So if you haven't got £400 to spend in the process, then you haven't got it. But at least you know what's available and that you should be doing it. And if you're satisfied with that, then that's absolutely fine. It's not for us to strong arm anyone into doing it. And I'd say, a reasonable percentage of people don't.
That was actually my next question on the list, is like, how many tenants don't go ahead with it?
Lots of people don't, and that's for all different types of reasons. Some people haven't budgeted for it, so don't want to do it. Some people, you touched on earlier on, need to complete really very quickly. Searches will take 3 weeks maybe to come back, something like that. So if you're really up against the wall in terms of the timings, then you mightn't be able to. But again, at least you know what you should be doing, and you can make that decision. It's not worth doing it after the event, because if you find a problem, it's already your problem at that point.
Okay, so if the question isn't, do I need a search, what is the right question that tenants should be asking?
I suppose they're asking themselves, what do I need visibility over before I can make a decision? So if there's risks in the background, am I going to proceed come what may? Because you get that sometimes, where the property is such an opportunity for the style of business, or the business is of the size that if there are any problems, they'll just sort them out. That you do get that from time to time as well.
They'll turn that sinkhole into a floor feature for for visitors.
Yeah, the river that's coming down the street just becomes an outside bath sort of thing. But no, I think most of the time it depends where the property is. Sometimes people will take if they've got another property, perhaps on a park or something, and they've done it before. You get all that type of thing. But if you're sensible about it, just because there wasn't a problem previously doesn't mean there isn't now. So you can tailor the pack. I mean, when we put in a request for searches, the provider will tell us if there's any additional searches that should be done. And then, of course, when we review the searches that come in, that might recommend steps that should be done as well. So there's different levels to the almost like property due diligence, if you like, that you're doing. But the answer to your question, there's still a staggering amount of tenants that don't. It's not for us to judge on that and sort of say, well, you should, or have any sort of dispute about it. It's a case of making sure they understand why they might want them, and then they can make that informed decision, and we just crack on with what they want us to do.
So if it's not a formality, what sort of timescales do you think realistically might need to be given to allow for the searches? If people are thinking, right, I want to do this lease, and they're perhaps getting the ball rolling, they've started viewing places, what sort of time frame do they perhaps need to get in their mind if they do decide to go down this route, so that I guess they can plan? Yeah,
so a standard lease transaction, including getting the searches and everything else, because it all happens simultaneously, so they don't, it's not a one by one process. There's all sorts of things happening at the same time. But a standard lease transaction will be sort of 4 to 7 weeks, something like that. Now, there are things that will push it well beyond that, because it depends, there might be a scheduler condition that takes some time, or there might be a third party that's dragging their heels, or there might just be the parties can't agree on something that goes round in a circle. But most transactions, 6 weeks should be enough to get it over the line. But we are sometimes instructed on things where people need to turn it around in 10 days, something like that. And we can try and facilitate that. But it's an impossibility then to include the searches, because, as I say, they'll take 2 or 3 weeks to come in.
And that's like with a third party. There might be like the local authorities. There's no money, there's no speeding them along, is there?
No, there's not. And of course, you can't criticise that, because the results have to be correct as well. So you put your search in. Some authorities are better than others. There can be delays for different reasons. So it's not just a local authority search. There can be delays on all sorts of searches. But once you've ordered them, you've paid for them. So you don't want a situation where you order the search and then you're going to complete before it comes in anyway, because that's a bit pointless. So you've got to make sure you've got proper time. We always tell people, you'll get questions at the start where people will say, well, I need to order things to arrive at the property. When can I do that? Well, we can't tell you when it's going to complete. We have to be really honest that you should build in loads of slippage time for the landlord, for example, deciding to go on holiday halfway through, or the solicitor on the other side being off sick perhaps, or the post not being what you might want it to be, or all those types of things that just add on a day or two here, them themselves being incapacitated for a period. So you should always add on a couple of weeks. And if it's going to be like heavy machinery or something that you're going to be ordering, or if you're going to instruct tradesmen to come in and all that, you need to make sure that they understand there's a bit of slippage in terms of when that will be. But, hard deadlines can be worked to. You just end up having to shave things off like the searches.
Fab. Well, I mean, I never realised or never even thought that searches in commercial leases was such a thing, to be perfectly honest.
No, most people don't. And I think that's where the question comes from, because they'll inquire about the lease. In their view, I think we've touched on it before in other episodes, you get can we have a quick look at the lease? And there's no such thing really as a quick look, because it's one of the most important documents that a business might ever enter into. It's the underpinning of the entire business, where it's going to operate from. And they'll be surprised when there is this option to investigate the building, because they hadn't thought about it, because they're not buying the building. And I think people do strongly make the connotation between purchasing something like a property, bricks and mortar.
I don't care if it floods, it's not my building. It's like, yeah, but if your desks are there and they're floating out the front door.
Well, and of course, it's not going to be anybody else's problem to sort out. So if you've got a full repair and lease and there's damage, then there might be that it's insured. But I mean, what's your insurance going to cost if it's on a floodplain?
And that might be just to repair the building. That's not about the fact you have to shut your business down for X.
Shut your business
window.
down, stop seeing customers perhaps, replace all your stuff. So there's lots of reasons. That's obviously an extreme one, isn't it? But there's things that might be revealed on a local authority search, like penalties that are already in place that haven't been complied with, notices to change something back perhaps, or something like that. You're the tenant, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the enforcement notice to sort it out.
The extension they built without permission has to be pulled down.
And
that was your office.
Half your team sitting in it. Yeah. So it's just worth looking at properly. And 99% of the time there won't be a problem that will stop, or there'll be a problem that can be circumnavigated or planned for, or in some way reduced. But for the modest cost involved, these days, if you think about what everything costs just in day-to-day living, a couple of £100 for that sort of peace of mind isn't really much at all. So it should always be considered at least. And if it's going to be a no, then really it should be because time doesn't permit, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, very wise words.
As always.
You looked absolutely shocked that I applied those words to you, but it's true. It's true.
It was a compliment. You haven't called me grey yet today, Mark.
Well, I was going to say you were wise.
Wise old.
Yeah.
Very much.
There was a connotation there, but I sort of refrained from verbalising it.
We got there.
My therapist says I shouldn't verbalise everything, I think. Right, guys. Well, if you indeed are thinking about a commercial lease, if it needs renewing, I mean, I suppose that is a question, actually. Renewals, so you're already in the property, you've got a lease, it's due for renewal, but you didn't do the searches first time round.
Probably not.
Is it too late?
No, probably not. I mean, you can always look into what the issues are, but you're sort of already grounded there. You're already in. If there's going to be a problem, there's going to be a problem probably by that stage. So spend your money wisely. Do it at the start. Later on, you can do searches to check things and to sanity check stuff. We are from time to time by people asked to review leases that they've already signed, which is a little bit pointless, say, for the fact that it's helping them understand their obligations. So we're happy to get involved in at any stage, really. But it's like a lot of the things we discuss. If you do it properly first time, then that should be it, done and dusted. And your renewals then should just be a straightforward contractual matter really that can be dealt with very quickly.
Absolutely. As always, get in touch, just have a conversation, find out what the lay of the land is. You don't necessarily have to then follow it up, but at least then you can make a decision of whether or not you need the support of the Johnson Boone team. So visit the website, johnsonboone.co.uk. There's a contact form on there. You can ring the main office number. Now, does Rob know it off by heart? Everyone else has passed the test.
0151 637 2034.
There we go. That's why he's the boss, people. So give him a call, book in with Rob or one of the members of the commercial lease team, and at least get that ball rolling. Rob, it's been a pleasure as always.
Pleasure as always. Thanks,
okay. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you again soon.
Thank you.
Get social at Johnson and Boone on Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook,